G'day guys, and welcome back to Aussie Gamer. Now, on today's show, I want to talk about the PlayStation 5 because I've got some predictions for all the panicking PlayStation fanboys who are absolutely flipping out at the moment thanks to Digital Foundry and the whole Shadow of War video that they released, where they clearly demonstrated that the Xbox One X is pummeling the PlayStation 4 Pro, and that's only on beta code. So look, things will be interesting from this point, and it's something that I don't think the Sony fanboys are wanting to get used to. So I think they need something to hope and pray for, and obviously that'll be the PlayStation 5. Now, first up, let's talk about predictions on when we're likely to see this thing, because honestly, I don't think we will see it in physical form available to consumers until at least holiday 2019. Now, a lot of that's going to come down to how well the Xbox One X is actually tracking, and if Microsoft are able to claw back a decent chunk of market share. You know, there's absolutely no reason for the PlayStation to rush anything to market if it's not going to have much of a dent. So if the Xbox One is launched and Microsoft aren't clawing back any market share, then Sony aren't really going to be in any hurry to release a PlayStation 5. Now, all of that could change if the Xbox One takes off and becomes a huge success. Alright, so let's talk about some of the specs. Now, I'm not going to go into sort of micro detail on processor or CPU or GPU, that sort of stuff. I think there's no question that the PlayStation 5 will be better than the Xbox One X whenever it releases, and it has to be. I mean, that's kind of a minimum expectation. You wouldn't really release a competitive console that's worse than your main competitor. It just doesn't make sense, unless you're Nintendo. So if we talk about, teraflops for a second, the Xbox has got just over 6 teraflops. I would expect clearly that the PlayStation 5 has to launch with more than that. It just doesn't make sense for it not to. A lot of people on the internet are saying somewhere between 8 and 10. Look, I think that's a reasonable number. I think it'll come down to price versus performance, and I think that's where the PlayStation 5 will aim. I think they ultimately have to hit something that's going to be slightly better than the Xbox One X, and the only real place it can go is 4K 60 frames per second. They're kind of the metrics, the next metrics that I think console manufacturers are wanting to consistently hit, or certainly gamers are wanting console manufacturers to consistently hit. So that's one thing to think about. I don't think the PlayStation 5, for example, is going to run natively any higher than 4K. It just doesn't make sense. I think the majority of consumers out there won't have a TV that's capable of running any of that content anyway. So I think 4K and 60 frames per second becomes the benchmark for, I would suggest, at least the next 5 to maybe 7 years. Now, the other thing that I think will be very interesting is pricing. Do Sony come in below the Xbox One X, or do they come in line price with the Xbox One X? Now, I think it depends on a couple of factors. One, what exactly will be in the box? For example, will they put in a 4K UHD Blu-ray player? Now, I think they have to if they're going to, tout this all-powerful 4K machine. I don't think you can have a true 4K machine if you're not playing all of the 4K content available on the market. But let's assume they do. I think that it will absolutely be line priced with the Xbox One X. I think there's no way that Sony are going to come in significantly cheaper when ultimately they are the market leader at this point in time. I think they will take an opportunity to raise the price of the PlayStation. Now, I do hear, as an Xbox guy, I do hear a lot of feedback from PlayStation fans that suggest that the Xbox One X is just a little bit more. Now, let's be honest here. The PlayStation 4 Pro relative to the PlayStation 4 base is a little bit more. When it comes to the Xbox One X, the graphical changes between the base Xbox One and, of course, this new Xbox One X are massively significant. I mean, let's just look at the Digital Foundry comparison for a minute, and even the comparisons between the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One are significant. And look, we know they're significant simply because of the way that that Tom from Digital Foundry was actually describing things. describing some of the texture work on the PlayStation 4 as soup-like. And it's stuff like that that's really going to hurt the PlayStation fans. Now, the other thing that Sony really has to be conscious of is all of those hardcore Sony guys, the guys that would have only invested in a PlayStation 4 Pro less than a year ago. And keep in mind, the PlayStation 4 Pro only came out, I think it was November in 2016. So the product hasn't actually been on the market for a full year at this point in time. So it's very, very concerning that the Sony fanboys and, you know, not a lot of talk out of Sony at this point in time, but the media are starting to shift their attention onto PlayStation 5. It's almost as if, in reality, they've written off the PlayStation 4 Pro, and that really indicates to me that it was the half step that everyone is describing it as. From my point of view, the PlayStation 4 Pro was never really a 4K machine. I don't think it was ever designed for that. I think it kind of was wedged into the 4K box when Microsoft started talking about 4K. I think if we're all being honest with each other, the real reason for the PlayStation 4 Pro was the support of PlayStation VR and the launch of VR into the console space. So look guys, there you go. Look, I'm predicting, if I've got to put a date on it, I think it will probably be announced in 2018, possibly even this year, 2017, at say, you know, the PlayStation Experience or PlayStation or Paris Games Week, something like that. I think they have to get on the front foot with an announcement about their intention for the future. I don't think Sony are really likely to launch anything in the near term. I think 2018 would be way too early. That would basically mean that the PlayStation 4 Pro is redundant within 18 months. But having said that, I think the only way around that for the guys at Sony is to essentially create the PlayStation 4 Pro as the base console, which means they'd have to remove their cheaper, just standard PlayStation Slim. So I don't think they're going to do that. I think they will fight a price war with Microsoft. You know, it'll be the PlayStation Slim versus the Xbox One S, and I think they'll go head for head. I think you'll see a lot of $199 price points in the US, probably $299 here in Australia. So great value for consumers, and that'll cover really the casual console market at the bottom price bracket. I'm pretty confident, depending on the success of the Xbox One X, that we will see some significant price drops for the PlayStation 4 Pro. And I think that's going to happen, particularly if Sony start losing market share. And I think that's one of the key metrics that all of these big corporations look at. They look at value growth, as in, you know, is my brand worth more today than it was last year? That's definitely a key sales metric. And the other one for both of these companies is market share. So is Microsoft winning the engagement war with Xbox One? Are they getting more people into their ecosystem? And I think there's some of the things that that will trigger Sony into either holding off or launching a PlayStation 5 in 2019. Now, I think 2019, but like I said, I think they'll have a little bit more scope to play with if the Xbox One does not have any dent in market share. So if things continue the way they have been going over the last couple of years, there's no real trigger for Sony to flick the switch on a PlayStation 5. They can probably actually afford to wait to 2020. Now, if Sony go and release a PlayStation 5, let's say they do that in 2019, I would almost guarantee that Microsoft and the Xbox brand would bounce straight back with some sort of power announcement for an Xbox One 2 or whatever the hell they're going to call it for 2020. They may even call it, you know, Xbox 2020. Because I think that's pretty much how things are going to unfold from this point. I think you'll see, you know, Company 1 just leapfrogging Company 2. So, you know, Sony will come out with, you know, this all-powerful Sony PlayStation, and then up to a year later, I think you'll see Microsoft coming out with, you know, the next more powerful, greatest console on earth, Xbox. So I think that's just what's going to happen for a little while. Until a point, I think at some stage in the future, that unfortunately, if you're a console fanboy, you're going to be disappointed with what I'm about to say here, because I do believe at some stage in the future, because I think things are just going to converge to the point where the power argument is no longer relevant. I think ultimately what's going to happen is the console itself will become a redundant technology. You know, as things like broadband speeds improve, as things like our infrastructure improves, our PCs improve, ultimately that'll mean that the console itself is probably irrelevant. You know, we may end up just getting little dongles or sticks for our TV to allow us to play some of these games that we know and love. So it'll be very interesting to see beyond 10 years what this console environment actually looks like. So there you go, guys. Look, that's just my thoughts on the way things are shaping up between the guys at Microsoft and the guys at Sony. I think there will be an announcement probably next year about the PlayStation 5, but I can't see it releasing until at least 2019. Now, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. You guys know I love the whole console war. It's a little bit of fun. You know, let's not take this thing too seriously. It's about games, and I see the whole console war as a little bit of a game in itself. But, you know, really keen to see how it's going to unfold. Would love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And as always, guys, I'll see you all in the next video.